We're starting.
I am told we are ready to start with our second panel. And again, for the benefit of our new witnesses who are appearing virtually or are in person, please ensure that your headsets or that you have the language of your choice, because we do have members that will be asking in French and other members that will be asking in English, and you are free to vous pouvez répondre en anglais ou en français, but to make sure that you have those devices already set, and we will keep our time. So welcome to our meeting. I want to welcome our witnesses for the second panel. We have with us in person in the room, Monsieur Hussein Panjou, President, Association Canadienne des Avocats Musulmans, Madame Fawziyi Mazhar, Executive Director, Coalition of Women Musulmanes de KW. Qu'est-ce que c'est KW? KW? Okay. And par videoconference on the screen, we have Imam and Executive Director Abdallah Yusri of Société de la Ummah Society from Nova Scotia, and Julie McFarland, Professeur émérite distingué de loi par vidéoconférence à titre personnel. So now we will start with 5 minutes each to the four witnesses for your opening remarks. Please try and pay attention if you're in virtually or in person. When I raise the 30-second marks, that means you only have 30 seconds. And when time is up, I will raise the time is up just to allow. And we have a hard stop at 30 minutes past, so we have 55 minutes remaining. And I will start with Madame Fawziyi Mazhar, please, for 5 minutes.
Good morning, bonjour, assalamu alaikum, greetings of peace. I've come to you from the Haldiman Tract, land that was granted to the Haudenosaunee of the 6 nations of the Grand River and are within the territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. I'm here on behalf of the Coalition of Muslim Women of KW, CMW, which provides opportunities for personal and professional growth for Muslim women and youth while addressing issues of gender-based violence, racism, discrimination, Islamophobia, and gendered Islamophobia through innovative programming and services, partnerships and collaboration, bridge building and public education, and advocacy and outreach. In April of 2021, CMW launched its hate reporting, documentation, and support services with seed funding from Department of Canadian Heritage. This first-of-its-kind service was built upon a decade of CMW's work against hate, racism, and Islamophobia in Waterloo region. Now known as Anti-Hate Services, or AHS, it provides various avenues to report and document hate and discrimination. It also provides an area of support services to the victims of hate and discrimination. CMW releases yearly reports based on the data collected by AHS. We just released the 3rd annual Snapshot of Hate in Waterloo Region report last week. The report covering January 1st to December 31st of 2023 shows a 26% increase in the reported cases, with a total of 115 cases reported. Waterloo Region Police Services, or WRPS, have reported a total of 369 hate-motivated crimes in 2023, an increase of 94% from 2022. 46% of the total cases through AHS were reported between October and December of 2023. When compared to the same time frame in 2022, an 83% increase in reported hate incidents and a 212% increase in Islamophobic, anti-Arab, and anti-Palestinian hate was noted. The AHS report documented 46 cases, that is 40%, motivated by Islamophobia, and 12 cases, that is 10%, motivated by anti-Palestinian hate. WRPS reported a total of 67 hate-motivated crimes targeting religion. However, only 2 of the 67 cases are reported as directed towards Islamic identity. 41% of the cases documented by AHS targeted individuals self-identified as Arab, and another 26% South Asian. WRPS reported 190 race-based hate-motivated crimes, most often targeting Black individuals. Key populations reflected in AHS report include females and youth under the age of 24. A total of 74 cases, 64% victimized female, and further 38 cases, 41% victimized youth under the age of 24. Furthermore, 69% of female and 71% of youth included Islamophobia as a reason for the incident. During an analysis of the data, a trend tying religious or cultural clothing directly to the victim's experience of hate emerged. Often this clothing was mentioned directly in verbal hate harassment cases. Of the 115 victims, 48% were wearing a hijab or a niqab, and in 7 cases, victims were wearing the keffiyeh. AHS report fills a crucial gap in the police-reported hate crimes, as you may have noticed. The trends emerging from AHS report are important to note for this committee. Women and youth in the Canadian Muslim communities are bearing the brunt of Islamophobia. They're more at risk of physical assault, verbal abuse, harassment in public spaces and educational environment, bullying and intimidation, and discrimination in workplaces and educational institutions. I hope that this esteemed committee will pay the due attention to the experiences of Muslim women and youth as part of the study on Islamophobia. It will also be important to look into the experiences of Canadian Arab and Palestinian communities to understand how Islamophobia, anti-Arab racism, and anti-Palestinian racism intersect. The report cited here is available at cmw-kw.org under the Publications tab in English.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. We will now go to up to 5 minutes, please, with Mr. Hussein Panjou, please, President.
Madam Speaker and honorable members of the Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights, hello, bonjour, and assalamu alaikum, and thank you for the opportunity to address you today. My name is Hussein Panjou, and I have the pleasure of serving as the National Chair for the Canadian Muslim Lawyers Association, also known as the CMLA. And our organization is a non-for-profit corporation that's dedicated to promoting the objectives and advocating on behalf of self-identifying members of the Muslim legal community. The CMLA consists of 5 provincial chapters consisting of over 400 members across the country, including professionals from all areas of the legal profession, including several sitting judges. We regularly appear in appellate court matters related to human rights and provide legal input and government consultations, just like this. And recently, the Senate Standing Committee on Human Rights adopted several elements of our testimony in the landmark report on Islamophobia and its impact on Muslims in Canada. This committee has already heard very detailed testimony about the history of Islamophobia, including the recent high-profile incidents in Quebec City and in London, Ontario. And in my submissions, I'm going to be highlighting the alarming rise in Islamophobia since October the 7th, with a focus on its impacts on local communities. In 2018, the CMLA launched a legal clinic known as the Muslim Legal Support Center, which prioritizes access to justice for Muslims in Ontario. And since the conflict, this clinic has encountered a 400% rise in intakes on issues ranging from employment discrimination to improper treatments in schools. The CMLA has also heard numerous concerning examples from lawyers and law students across Canada who have faced harsh and unwarranted consequences in response to legitimate speech regarding this conflict. There is a widespread fear that if lawyers or students express political views that differ from their colleagues, that they will face discrimination in the employment context. Furthermore, on social media, some lawyers have openly called for the establishment of blacklists of lawyers and law students who participate in pro-Palestinian activities and demonstrations. And 2 weeks ago, a retired judge issued a 200-page review that denounced one such backlash against law students who signed a pro-Palestinian petition, which required him to publicly call for civility and respectful dialogue within the legal community. Unfortunately, there's also been a recent rise in governmental policies that also have contributed to Islamophobia. This has included police officers using a disproportionate amount of force and tactics on pro-Palestinian demonstrators. This has also included a provincial legislature that now prohibits elected officials from wearing the keffiyeh in the workplace, which evokes another provincial bill that bans public sector workers from wearing the hijab. This even includes our highest court recently uninviting racialized speaking delegates, vaguely citing the speaker's social media comments regarding the same conflict. Now, our communities are already over-policed and underserved. And these recent decisions further embolden Islamophobic incidents on the ground. Now, in closing, if the government wants to address Islamophobia, they need to take accountability and focus on three main areas. First, rebuilding trust with communities. The lack of trust is found across governmental institutions and is especially pronounced in national security, criminal justice, and law enforcement departments. Secondly, recognizing that policies shape perceptions. Islamophobia is learned behavior, and when governments introduce actions, languages, and policies that target particular groups, that often provides a license for other Canadians to discriminate against these same communities. And thirdly, meaningfully engaging with Muslim community and related groups. And this includes an understanding of the intersectional forms of discrimination that include sexism and anti-Palestinian racism. These are distinct concepts and have a compounding effect that is greater than the sum of its parts. And there's an inherent need to appreciate the lived experiences of our groups when developing and implementing policies that directly affect us. And together, these principles can lead to a more cohesive environment, but also to fairer policies and more defensible laws that will stand the test of challenges in our appeal courts and in the courts of public opinion. So thank you for your time, and I'm happy to expound on any of these themes and any other issues that will be helpful for this committee.
Thank you very much for your time. We'll now go to Imam Abdullah Yusri, please, for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Honorable Madam Chair and honorable members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. My name is Abdullah Yusri. I'm the Imam and Executive Director of the Ummah Society. It's the largest Muslim charity in the Atlantic region. As an Imam, my role is unique. I am often the first stop for community members when hate crimes occur, and also the first stop for government officials in the same circumstances. I witness firsthand the impact of Islamophobia on individuals of our community. I have counseled children who are bullied in schools, women who are harassed for wearing hijabs, and men who are profiled and discriminated against in workplaces and public spaces. Since October the 7th, the situation has worsened significantly. I have observed a notable spike in Islamophobic attacks through physical assaults, verbal abuse, and a disturbing rise in hate speech. There is fear everywhere in the community. Also, there is anger and frustration for lack of accountability towards the aggression taking place against members of the Muslim community here in Canada. I feel the justice system has failed miserably to protect the constitutional rights of Muslim Canadians to express themselves and to be themselves. In Canada, the country that celebrates all cultures, all of a sudden, the most iconic cultural keffiyeh was banned, leaving many community members questioning their identity. More importantly, attempts to silence Canadian Muslims by threatening their livelihoods was the worst and the most painful one. Firing many Canadian Muslims and threatening many others in an attempt to silence them has been a shameful and horrible act that shocked thousands in our community, including our imams and community leaders. Honorable members, I have counseled even Muslim lawyers who are fearful to utter a word or even express their pain to their colleagues while they mourn the loss of immediate family members in Gaza. Allow me to share two stories from our local community in Halifax that illustrate the personal toll of these injustices. Yara, the only Muslim Arab woman working in the media in all the Atlantic, CTV News. She was fired from her job immediately over alleged comments she made. And the same woman was a victim for continuous bullying, harassment, and discrimination for over a year in the same workplace. And despite these incidents being documented and reported, it was ultimately neglected. I leave you to imagine the impact of such incidents on all the women in our community and the youth. Nargis, the only Muslim woman working in politics in Halifax, working for the Minister of Immigration and the PC government, was fired immediately as well in a very humiliating way over alleged comments she did not even make. Furthermore, many imams and Muslim chaplains like Imam Arij Anwar and many others were also fired from their jobs in hospitals and universities with no legal consequences. I can sit here and tell many untold stories to the committee. However, I watched the previous sessions held last week and I heard honorable members asking about solutions. Here are a few measures I believe can make a difference. At the Ummah Society, we have started providing training to local police officers, first responders, government officials, etc., about Islam, Muslim cultures, about Islamophobia, and about religious and cultural sensitivities. We have seen the impact of providing these trainings that were attended by many every year, and we have seen this impact in our city. Mandating such training for government officials and make it a requirement to receive government funding, I believe would make a huge difference. In Halifax, we successfully advocated for the establishment of the first hate crime unit in the Atlantic. Before that, we did not have one in the whole Atlantic Canada. However, it is struggling to operate because of lack of funding from the municipality. The federal support by funding the hate crime units across the country would make huge impact in reporting, counting, and analyzing and protecting all community members. Thank you for the invitation and for this great work you are doing.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. Right on time. And for the last 5 minutes, please to Madame Julie McFarlane, Professor. You're on mute, Madame.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and members of the committee. My name is Julie McFarlane, and I am an Emerita Distinguished Professor of Law. In my presentation today, I'm going to say a few words about some research that I conducted in 2010 to 2012 and the book that I wrote as a result, which was about Muslim marriage and divorce customs in North America as practiced amongst North American Muslims, both here in Canada and in the US.
Sorry to interrupt you, Madame McFarlane. Can you please put the boom between your mouth and...
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Okay, no worries.
Down.
Okay, I did stop your time, but I'll start it again. Please continue.
Okay, thank you. So in my testimony, I'm going to say something about the work that I did in 2010 to 2012 and a little bit beyond that, working with Muslim community members in Canada and in the US, and what I learned about Islamophobia as somebody coming very new and very ignorant to this area. I want to say a little bit about events post October the 7th, although I don't have empirical data, but I do have some observations on that point. And finally, a couple of suggestions as to measures to build on my colleagues' points that you've already heard. When I began to study the role of Islamic laws in the ways in which North American Muslims conducted their marriage and divorces. I was doing so because all I had heard about this from the media was that it was a very, very bad and terrifying thing. In fact, I distinctly remember a student coming into my office one day at the university and saying to me, I'd like to write a paper on Sharia law. And I asked, well, what do you know about Sharia law? And they said, well, nothing, but I know it's really bad. And I think that in some ways was a summary for what I discovered over the next subsequent years of my research. Lots and lots of lack of knowledge and information and lots of prejudice in a way that, was truly astonishing to me. And I am extremely grateful for the coaching that I received from imams, from members of the communities, as I found my way through to do this research and to talk with people about a very sensitive subject, obviously, which is how they handle their family transitions, both marriage and divorce. And the first thing that I learned was that Sharia law is a term that's been made up by the Western media. There is Sharia and there is Islamic law, and they are two different things. Sharia is the path that Muslims follow in order to live a good life. It's a totally personal experience. As one imam once told me, there is a Sharia for every Muslim in Canada, which I thought really encapsulated this. And, this was one of the first sort of staggering revelations that I had, that rather than being something that Muslims wanted to, as the media would have it, inflict on everybody, this horrible sounding Sharia law that seemed to involve lots of nasty punishments. In fact, Sharia was a deeply personal value system, which did vary from person to person. And Islamic law were the principles that had been built out of the Quranic texts and the Hadith by jurisprudence in the 4th century onwards. And of course, these were male jurists. So a lot of that jurisprudence is somewhat male-centric, which is a tendency of every single Western system that was developed in the 4th century and still some today. So I, first of all, realized that there was a lot of ignorance that created fear. And that in actual fact, this idea that there was some kind of deep seething resentment going along inside Muslim communities in Canada and the US, in which they desperately wanted other people to accept their system, was actually completely baseless. There was no basis for that. And I asked people, talked to people constantly in hundreds of interviews about this. And I never heard a single person in that group say that they thought that Sharia should be imposed on non-Muslims. And if you take that out of the picture, then you understand a great deal more about the fear and prejudice that has developed towards the Muslim community and its lack of basis. So in terms of some measures that I think are super important as a result of that work, I think working with the imams is really important because the imams are a very, very important source of influence, and they're also family problem solvers in many communities. I think that there need to be some clear standards around dealing with domestic violence. And obviously, there's an issue of women's governance in mosques, but certainly it's important to work with the imams. It's also important, I believe, to work with kids at school.
Professor, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We will now, and I will be faithful to keeping the time. Yes, Mr. Asazi?
Madam Chair, I just noticed that Mr. Morris from the Green Party is here. I was wondering if you would care to ask for unanimous consent.
Well, if you're asking me to ask, I'd be pleased to ask. I guess Mr. Morris is asking for unanimous consent to be allowed a 2.5-minute slot to ask questions. No? I'm sorry. I'm hearing all kinds of no's on my left side of the table. Thank you. Now, go to 6 minutes each per each of the four parties here, and I will be faithful and try and keep the time as best as I can. Can we please stick to the subject at hand so that I don't have to entertain any points of order, because I will have to be strict on time. We have a hard stop at 30 minutes past the hour. I will start with MP Van Popta, I believe. No? Okay. Okay. MP Givani, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the witnesses for being here and for your contributions to this conversation. I certainly think that we are due for an important conversation about religious freedom in our country, and this has been an important part of that discussion. I want to start off by just maybe trying to give a bit of my perspective as a person from the suburbs of Toronto. Since 2021, we've had over 100 Christian churches burned, vandalized, or desecrated in Canada. And sometimes when I see that, and I see the lack of media coverage of those attacks on religious freedom, when I see that we cannot even in the House of Commons get every party to agree on condemning those attacks on religious freedom, I think to myself, like, yo, dog, are we like in the Truman Show or something right now? Like, it just seems so frustrating and puzzling how you get to this point. And often I will hear from constituents who are concerned about it, and they'll say, express a sense of hopelessness. Like, well, how do you get people to care about this? And then I see other communities go through their own ordeals when it comes to attacks on their religious freedom. We've seen, schools and synagogues get shot at in Montreal, or just over the weekend, we've seen the House hate-motivated attack on a Muslim family in London. And I think to myself, well, maybe there's an opportunity for us all to work together and draw attention to the various ways that faith communities in this country may experience discrimination or persecution. Maybe there's an opportunity for us to build some bridges across different religious communities in hopes that the experiences that are happening throughout this country right now, where people feel in many ways afraid that they will lose their jobs by showing that they are a person of faith, or that they will lose something, their standing perhaps, in their workplace or their school for showing that they are a person of faith. That perhaps by working together, we actually wind up being able to protect believers of all different types. So I guess maybe I'll pose my question on that to you, Mr. Panju. As you think about, charting a path forward, where do you see the possibility of different faith communities being able to work together and support each other better?
Thank you for that question, MP Giovanni. You're right. There is a sincere division right now in our society amongst various cultures and faiths, and we are optimistic that we can get to a point eventually where this unity is developed. I understand that the purpose of these sessions is to speak about what governments can do, and there are so many things that can be done, and one thing I want to focus on is to speak about how government policies shape perceptions. I won't profess to be an expert in all forms of discrimination, but to the extent that I'm an expert in anything, it is Islamophobia. And I know that Canadians look to our leaders for direction. And the research confirms that when there is hateful rhetoric from the top, whether it's the government in power or other politicians or any other people of influence, other individuals from the community take notice. And there's a corresponding impact at the ground level. And so when governments introduce actions and policies to target particular groups, as I mentioned, that provides a license for other Canadians to discriminate against these same communities. So to the extent that Islamophobia is a recognized issue, and I think largely there's a consensus, but I know that there's some that disagree, I think there needs to be a tangible action and engagement, not just money that's invested in different programs, but a meaningful appetite to hear the perspective from those who are impacted the most. And so to the extent that governments can help to coordinate this, we think that would be a great starting point. So often, right now, Islamophobia, for example, is conflated with anti-Palestinian racism. And they're related but different concepts. Not everyone who is a Muslim is Palestinian, and not everyone who's a Palestinian is a Muslim. And for many Canadians, that's not an apparent issue. And the compounding impacts of anti-Palestinian racism and gendered Islamophobia are serious concepts. And we think the governments need to take an active role to recognize this and also play a role in educating our communities about the values and strengths that make Canadians who we are.
Mr. Perry, just a follow-up question before my time is up. There was a moment of hope, I thought, last summer, where I did start to see different religious communities working together. And the particular issue of concern for many believers was the matter of parental rights and the fact that at different levels of government, we had politicians who were actively campaigning against the rights of mothers and fathers to play a leading role in their children's education. I wonder if you have any thoughts on that as a potential issue for collaboration.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm familiar that matters of education fall under the provincial purview, so I'll be mindful of this committee and this head of government's jurisdiction. Muslims are not a monolith, and there's different perspectives even within our community. And so questions like these are important, and to understand how communities feel about these, there needs to be meaningful discussions within our community to get these answers.
Thank you very much. We will now go for 6 minutes to Member of Parliament Ahsasi, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And given that there wasn't consent for Mr. Morris to ask a question, I will share my time with him. Allow me to start off by thanking all of our witnesses. I found your testimony very, very helpful. Now, if I can start off with Mr. Panju. First of all, thank you for leading the Canadian Muslim Lawyers Association. I've had the pleasure of receiving a few legal briefs, and the legal work was spot on and very, very helpful. So thank you for that. Now, in your testimony, you touched on the fact that since October 7th, we've seen some discrimination in the workplace. This is something that many of us have read about in the papers as well. And it truly, truly is chilling that if someone was expressing concern about developments in the Middle East or was of the opinion that human rights was not being respected, that they would be let go from their place of work. Given that it is a very significant issue, and it concerns me to no end, I was wondering if you could elaborate on that, please.
Thank you for that important question. And as I mentioned in my introduction, there are serious concerns about members from our community about their employment prospects. And without repeating too much of what I said earlier, there are legitimate concerns that if employees or students or candidates make comments about the conflict, they will face repercussions. This matter was perhaps best exemplified recently with an instance of student protesters who had issued a petition calling for change and expressing their position on the conflict. Numerous students from the Lincoln Alexander School of Law signed a letter of support for Palestine and all forms of Palestinian resistance. And there was extensive backlash from the legal community that targeted the students who signed this letter, many of whom were racialized individuals, including many visibly Muslim women. So students were doxxed on various social media platforms. There was various organizations and commenters who referred to them to be named, expelled, deported, and labeled them as terror apologists. And many students received disturbing and threatening emails, phone calls, and messages that included threats of violence and death, as well as graphic videos and images. This is abhorrent. And following extensive backlash, this extensive backlash that I was talking about, the university engaged a retired Chief Justice MacDonald to thoroughly review this letter. And in that letter, the justice found that this letter was not anti-Semitic, and that it was not anti-Semitic to criticize the actions and policies of the Israeli government towards Palestinians or to apply concepts from Islam, international law, like colonialism, genocide, and occupation, and discussions of and statements about the governments of Israel. And that's a direct quote from the justice's report.
Panju, you're talking about prospective work. These were
Yes.
individuals who were trying to get jobs at law firms, but then they were blacklisted. But I've also heard of instances where people who had jobs were let go because they expressed an opinion. What do you know about that? And I have very little time, probably 40 seconds.
Yes, that's right. This has been happening on a widespread basis, which was accentuated at the time of the conflict. There's a need for proper discussion about what constitutes hate in our communities. And if there are individuals who are actually expressing hateful comments and hateful perspectives, there's a role to deal with those. But right now, there's a lack of understanding and context about what words and actions really mean. And to the extent that all individuals are entitled to due process and fairness and civil rights, there's a need for the government to make this known to all employees to make sure that we live in a society that's reflective of the values that we adhere to.
Thank you. I will share the remainder of my time with Mr. Morris.
Thank you, Ali.
Just a second, please. I stopped the time. You have 1 minute, 54 seconds, but I stopped it. Professor McFarlane, I'm sorry. Is there a problem?
No, I just wanted to be able to say something.
Oh, I'm afraid I am guided by the rules of the House. I cannot recognize a witness unless there's a question posed to the witness.
Even when what I have to say is relevant to the question that was just asked.
Yeah, so witnesses are able to send anything else in writing. So I must continue because we have a hard stop. Thank you. 1 minute and 54 seconds left. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ali. Fazia, it's so wonderful to have you here. It seems so fitting, given that the third annual Snapshot of Hate report came out from the Coalition of Muslim Women just last week. As you shared in your testimony, 115 total cases of hate and discrimination through the anti-hate services reporting, and a drastic increase since October 7th. I was wondering if you wanted to say more in terms of recommendations for this committee as they consider what the federal government could be doing in terms of additional measures to address Islamophobia.
Thank you, Mike. It's a pleasure to see you here as well. Sorry, thank you, MP Morris. To answer your question, CMW has actually released a number of recommendations at different times for different levels of government. One thing I think that Mr. Panju was talking about earlier as well, the actual definition of hate, and in our case, especially an agreed upon definition or description of Islamophobia, which is still missing, and a lot of sort of negative rhetoric that comes towards Muslims and others, their allies, who even try to take the word Islamophobia, say Islamophobia, is that there's nothing. Islamophobia is nothing. It's something that Muslims have just invented or something like that. Because there is no, and it's always sort of put against or pit against the freedom of speech. The idea is that somehow if we are doing anything to address Islamophobia, it's going to curtail freedom of speech. So having an agreed upon definition of Islamophobia, gendered Islamophobia, and others, where people agree and community is involved, would be a great starting point for federal government.
Thank you, Fazia.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated for that response. Monsieur Fortin, la parole est à vous pour 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Fortin, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses who are here today. I will jump right into it. I'd like to ask a question to Imam Yusri. I have a question for you. I listened to your speech earlier where you spoke out against hate speech towards Muslim communities in Canada. And you mentioned that this has harmed relationships between people in Canada. I understand what you were saying, and I'd like to know, in your opinion, do you think all forms of hate speech should be forbidden in Canada, or do you think that we should allow hate speech to have its place in Canada?
Thank you, MP, for the question. I understand that many sessions were held before with about the anti-Semitism, and I think that we are discussing now issues about Islamophobia, and definitely with no all forms of hate should be addressed and should be banned, and we should all work together to combat all forms of hate against Muslims or other religions and cultures. This goes without saying. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur l'Imam.
Thank you, Imam Yusri. I have a second question for you. At present, there's a provision in the Criminal Code 319 that bans incitement of hate and anti-Semitism. But there is an exception in the code that says that a defense is if a person has expressed an opinion on a religious subject or an opinion based on a religious text that the person believes in. In your opinion, should this exception be eliminated from the criminal code, or should we maintain this exception and this defense and therefore allow fomenting hate if it's based on a religious text?
As I said in my first comment, we should work together to combat all kinds of hate and work together towards this with legislatures and actively. Speaking about this particular law or amendment that you are proposing, I am not aware of its details. However, I would like to say that protecting the freedom of expression and the freedom of people of the faith and all faith groups to practice their religion freely is a fundamental right that we have seen so many attempts to take away from this freedom through different proposals recently. One through the chaplaincy program to remove people of Abrahamic faith from being chaplains in the federal government prisons, and different types of legislations. So I would be.
Je vous remercie, Imam Yusri, mais comme
Thank you. But since I only have 2 minutes, I'd like to hear your colleagues on the same question. I'd like to ask the question to Ms. Mazar. So it's the same question. In your opinion, should we maintain the exception in the criminal code, or should we forbid hate speech even if it is based on religious text?
Through you, Madam Chair, thank you for your question. It's a difficult question to answer as a layperson, and I will probably go towards thinking of competing rights under the human rights legislation, where people have right to practice their religion freely on one hand, and then people or citizens have also rights to live their lives free of harassment, free of any kind of hate and discrimination and things like that. It's really very difficult to say at this point for me whether we keep it or we let it go.
Ok, je vous remercie, madame. Je m'excuse.
Thank you. I don't mean to be rude, but we have very little time. I think we have about a minute left. I'd like to ask the same question to Mr. Panju. I understand that you are a lawyer and also president of the CMLA. And so don't know if you're an expert when it comes to freedom of expression, but in your opinion, should we maintain the religious exception in the criminal code that allows the defense of promoting hatred if it is based on a religious text, or do you think it should be eliminated?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. I know I don't have very much time to answer this question. In fact, I see you have 30 seconds. I'm happy to give more details if this comes around another time. But for now, ultimately, it may be up to the courts to decide whether or not this bill is discriminatory. But fundamentally, our organization rejects the bill's underlying assumption that religions and religious communities are instigating and fomenting hate. I'm not sure what evidence this assumption is based off of, but it sounds a lot like religious and Islamic tropes that have been going on for generations. Our experience is the complete opposite, that these communities instead serve to build inclusion and enable the ability to contribute to our society. And the timing of this bill is concerning, and I'm happy to go into more detail when the question comes around again.
Thank you. Mr. Garrison, please, 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I want to go back to Ms. Bazar and talk a bit more again about the rise in in violent hate crimes directed toward Muslim women that you found in your community. I know you gave us a bit of detail about that. Rather than asking you what the government should do at this point, I'm going to ask you, what's the community doing in response to these crimes? And how is the community supporting Muslim women?
To you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your question. First, I wanted to start off by saying that this is not a problem that Muslim women created or are responsible for. This is not a problem that we bear the responsibility to tackle it. However, for us as Coalition of Muslim Women, from the beginning, we thought this is our home. And if there is a challenge in our home, if there is an issue in our home, we're not going to just sit back and let other people resolve this issue. So that really gave us a lot of strength, and we have been doing it. In terms of how the government can support community level initiatives, funding is very important. But as we have heard from different witnesses today, it's also the action, it's also the role modeling, it's also the language that the government is using, different levels of governments are using. Everything together is going to create the environment where Muslim women would be able to live free of harassment, not just harassment, but actually real physical assault, as we have heard so many times today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bazar. I didn't mean to imply that it was the responsibility of the Muslim community or Muslim women, but simply to say in the absence of action that I recognize that Muslim women are responding and providing supports to women. I want to turn to Dr. McFarland, who wanted to intervene earlier and give her a chance to provide a response if we haven't passed that moment. And then if we have, I have another question for Dr. McFarland.
Thank you very much, Mr. Garrison. Just a quick point on the rise in worrying employment conflict since October the 7th. One of the things I want the committee to be aware of, and in this way your work overlaps with the work of the Heritage Committee, is that in these instances where people raise complaints about Islamophobia and prejudice and are terminated because of a remark they made or simply because they're complaining about hostility in the workplace, they are almost without exception required to sign a non-disclosure agreement. So you're not going to know about the number or extent of these instances because they're hidden in an NDA.
Thank you for that important information, Dr. McFarland. At your opening statement, I believe you ran out of time and you were about to talk about working with young people and students in combating Islamophobia.
Thank you.
Please continue.
One of the things that this research taught me was how woefully ignorant I was and how I believe many of us who have not grown up understanding anything about Muslim culture and about Islam as a religion. And I think that this is one of many things that we would do well to be preventative about if we want to avoid the kinds of confusion and misunderstandings and therefore fear which gets generated, and that's been generated in a very sophisticated way by a machine that's been driving that fear. And that would be to give more education to young people so that they understand something more about their Muslim classmates, that they understand why a girl in their class is wearing hijab, that it doesn't mean that she is being oppressed at home, but this may be an important choice for her. And the facility that is increasingly recognized for Muslim prayer in schools is expanded into giving some more information and knowledge to other kids as well, so that they might be able to grow up, unlike this generation, believing that Muslims are the other and they are to be feared.
Thanks very much. I just want to go back to, I'm sorry, Imam Yusri in the Atlantic, and ask about resources available. When he talked about there was no hate crimes unit except in Halifax. So what is his general experience when people experience hate crimes in terms of resources available to them?
Thank you, MB Kirsten, for the question. Actually, it was not even a hate crime unit in Halifax. We have been working and advocating for this to happen and to be established, and it was established only 2 years ago after the Afzal family disaster in London, Ontario. And that, with that being said, the entire Atlantic Canada did not have any hate crime unit. Time is up.
Yeah, sorry about that. We may get a chance to come back to you. Let me now go very quickly to the second round that we have. Very quickly to Mr. Moore for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for appearing today on this important study. My first question to Executive Director Mazar is about what I think is one of the worst acts of violence and terror in Canada, and that was the shooting at the mosque in Quebec City in January 2017. In 2022, the Supreme Court of Canada heard an appeal from a Court of Appeal of Quebec concerning the sentence that the individual received. I don't use the individual's name because a lot of the victims' families don't want to use the individual's names. But this individual was given a sentence which meant that he would not get out of jail, and the victims' families would not have to attend parole hearings. But based on the Supreme Court decision in 2022, this individual will now be eligible, who took 6 innocent lives, will now be eligible for parole when they is barely middle-aged. This is we have heard at this committee the tremendous burden placed on victims and victims' families through the parole process, whereby every 2 years the families have to relive a tragedy. So we've been calling on the government to respond in some way to that decision on behalf of victims and their families. I wonder if you have any thoughts on that. Should the government respond in some way to that decision to ensure that we respect those whose lives were lost?
So if I talk from the perspective of the Muslim community, Canadian Muslim community in general, of course there was a lot of disappointment with this decision, and it was perceived that Muslim lives were at least perceived that Muslim lives are probably not as important as other lives lost. Comparisons were made with other cases, especially the case of the, I think, RCMP officers who were killed, lots of comparisons and things like that. However, if you talk to me personally, I would say that hate just did not kill for like 6 people that day. Hate also killed a 7th person that day. Similarly, for 2021, the person is alive, but the life is not the same for that person as well. Hate just does not impact those who are victims, but also the perpetrators so badly, especially when they're young, 20 years old, killing 4 people, and then sending that person behind the bars for the rest of his life, maybe not the answer to hate. So in Waterloo region is renowned for its restorative justice roots, with the Mennonite community's presence over there. We're CMW, Coalition of Muslim Women of KW, worked with Community Justice Initiative to start a mediation program for identity-based harm and violence called Sulah, which means peace in many Muslim cultural languages. And I would say personally, so I understand the pain of the family. Like imagine that 10-year-old or 9-year-old boy, now he's an adult, and every 2 years he has to go and present his case, and how traumatic that case that is going to be with him and other family members. Is there a way to find a middle place? Is there a way where the family doesn't have to go through all of this challenge of coming back? And then this is my personal opinion, and also like from the organizational perspective, are there ways to rehabilitate? Are there ways to bring bring restorative justice, mediation, not necessarily in the murder case? They will have to complete the sentence and things like that. But
Okay.
I don't.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The chair is telling me I only have 30 seconds left. Those 5 minutes go.
17.
Oh, 17 seconds. And I did have a question for you, Mr. Panju, on you had mentioned the pressure on within the public sector or other organizations on conformity that minority groups can feel. I think
Apologies, Member of Parliament,
There we
Monsieur
go.
Moore. I'm sorry. We will now go for up to 5 minutes with Mr. Zubiri. MP Zubiri, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses for being here. Fawzia, it's good to see you in person again. I was happy to visit your center in your community so a few months ago. That was you're doing fantastic work, and I recently was in London, Ontario, just a few days ago to mark the 3-year anniversary of the Afzal family's passing. And I remember also on the night of January 29, 2017, I got a call from friends in Montreal saying that they needed somebody to handle English media in Montreal for a vigil that was being done because of the terror attack that happened in Quebec City. I remember at the time that I was almost not shocked that such a thing. I was not shocked, to be frank and honest, that such a thing happened in our country. And province, my beautiful province of Quebec. I was not shocked because of the conversations that were happening at the time. And I think that this study exemplifies the need to confront discrimination, in this particular study, Islamophobia. And I'm still amazed how we can obfuscate the issue when we're studying this issue. We don't genuinely study it sometimes, and that is disheartening, to be frank. I am also encouraged, actually, when I hear, for example, Ms. McFarlane, and she brings me back to the lendemain of January 29, January 30th, when there was a vigil in Montreal. It was bitter cold, -20. And on the stage, we said, no politicians on the stage, no politicians. They get enough time to speak. And we had organizers and activists on the stage only. I myself was one of them. And I remember looking out into the crowd in the bitter cold in Montreal, how many people from across Quebec society, most of whom did not have any skin in the game at all whatsoever, across Quebec society were there in solidarity saying, no, not in our name, this is not our province, this is not who we are. And I remember for the next 7 to 10 days in each and every Quebec publication, each and every publication in Montreal and across the province, how there were the important human stories of who Muslims in Quebec are and vulgarizing who Muslims in Quebec are, meaning making it plain instead of putting forth discriminatory, putting forth things that are unclear and whatnot. So I want to go to Ms. McFarlane and ask you in just about 45 seconds, if you can. Please, can you share with us your path a bit more? I think it's really interesting. If you want to share with us a bit more. And then I want to go to Mr. Hussein Panju afterwards. Please, Ms. McFarlane.
Well, I was responding as a researcher and an academic to basically banner headlines, which if I had taken them at their face value would have told me that Muslims were biting the heads off chickens in mosques in Ontario in particular. There was a particular firestorm in Ontario that started this off. And I think it's just really important that people understand that they have so much to learn here and not to fear. And what I tried to do in my book in the end was to say, Muslims, like all of us, they have their family transitions, they have their issues. And I would also want to add that in terms of dialoguing, which has been talked about a lot today, one of the things I learned is that many of these folks aren't observant Muslims. It has to be possible to include people who wouldn't describe themselves as observant, but for whom the cultural precepts are important and are just as discriminated against as anybody else.
Thank you.
In these dialogues.
And Mr.
30
Panju,
seconds.
I'd like to ask you you mentioned doxing of students. Do you have any recommendations for us as a committee to give to other bodies around that, in particular the Law Society of Ontario or Human Rights Commission? Do you have anything? And you can also submit this response in writing. Also, I'm interested in research around this particular point.
Yes, thank you. So on that point, we would encourage all parties of power to direct employees to abandon all blacklists regarding political expression and ensure that employees are treated fairly, that there should be prohibiting disciplinary measures against students or staff who engage in these sorts of activities as well.
Thank you very much. If there's anything more, please do submit them in. For the last 2.5 minutes, please, Monsieur Fortin.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for Dr. McFarlane. In your opinion, if you look at discrimination, violence, whether it's towards the Muslim community or Jewish communities or any other type of discrimination based on race, color of skin, gender, aren't we at a time where we have to abolish all types of hate? And in that sense, don't you think that promoting hatred in Canada should be forbidden, even if it's based on a religious text or religious opinion?
I think that it's extremely important that we remain very vigilant about hate speech. And I am a big supporter of the need to have hate speech principles to protect people. But I also think that one of the things that we do in our legal system is we exclude any kind of reasoning. It's very interesting. That might be based on a religious text. If you see a Muslim woman trying, for example, to enforce her mahr, her agreement that she's made under Islamic law for an amount of money to be paid in the event of divorce, the courts won't accept any arguments that are based on references to religious texts. That seems to me to be completely ridiculous. So I don't understand why we would not include reference to religious texts as part of what we want to protect in hate speech.
Merci, Madame McFarlane.
Thank you, Dr. McFarlane. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Alors, for the next 2.5 minutes, please, Mr. Garrison.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. One of the topics that hasn't come up today has been the role of the media, the social media giants, in furthering disinformation and hatred. And I wonder whether, I'll start with Ms. Mazar, if there's been any positive experiences in trying to work with the social media companies in stopping that distribution of disinformation and hate.
You, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. MP Garrison. For us as a regional organization with very little capacity, few staff, and all that, it's beyond our capacity to actually take these big giants into any kind of account. We have seen a tremendous increase in reporting for online hate, and it's coming from all parts of Canada, you wouldn't believe, from Burnaby to Surrey to everywhere, and people want us to intervene. We're trying to learn ourselves how can we intervene in these cases. They're sending us information this year especially. At this time, I don't have an answer. We don't have the capacity. But of course, we look up to the government to do things where there is some accountability for these big giants.
And thank you. And the same question to you, Mr. Panju. What about trying to hold them accountable for promoting hatred?
Thank you for that question. So we're familiar that Bill 63 is currently before the House. It's a complex issue, and I think that there needs to be some more dialogue with our groups on a more directed basis. You're right, equity-seeking groups like ours are often the victims of and the targets of hate speech, but there also needs to be some more consultation to ensure that any such measures do not overly censor legitimate non-hateful speech from equity-seeking groups as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Garrison. So as the chair, let me thank all our witnesses in all our panels, and particularly the ones before me here. This completes this particular study, and as an Atlantic Canadian and a Nova Scotian, I want to thank you, Imam Yusri, for shedding some light on Atlantic Canada, because I feel a lot of times where it's a bit overlooked by the bigger centres. And thank you for talking about the training that you are conducting with police officers and everyone else, and of course the many interfaith activities that you've been organizing over the many number of years, in which I personally have attended, and we all know that these interconnections are so important. So, colleagues, it's 1:28. Thank you very much for attending today. And as I said, this completes the study of this particular one. You will receive from the clerk in due course the activities for Thursday. So have a good day, and we'll see everybody on Thursday. Thank you very much. Meeting